am greatly humbled to have had this opportunity to take a trip with Eva Corps to Poland and to Auschwitz, and I want to be able to share a little bit with you about my experience there in Auschwitz and how it pertains to me as your school resource officer. I have to give thanks, though, to Hoosier Heartland and Brad. Without them and their generosity, I would not be able to have taken this trip. And Hoosier Heartland really is breaking the mold when it comes to community banking. We are very fortunate to have them in our area. They do a lot of things for our community that sometimes don't even necessarily go noticed, but they are very much appreciated. I would also like to thank Candles Museum, Holocaust Museum. They put 100 people on the ground in Poland for a week and didn't even get a meal wrong. And that is phenomenal planning on their part to be able to get that type of planning down to an art, for that matter. On October 13, 2017, an email came out at 11:12 a.m. saying Hoosier Heartland State Bank is offering a scholarship for 4 educators from each of the schools in our county as well as North Putnam. By 11:21, I had already sent 2 emails and 3 phone calls seeing if I qualify, because it was offered for classroom educators. And I was very fortunate that I was able to sneak in there by luck, because I teach DARE to 5th grade. DARE is a decision-making program, and so I was able to just barely squeak in there. And so on February 3rd, 2018, Hoosier Heartland State Bank offered up their Shared Values Awards Night. And those of you who know me know I like to talk. For the first time in my history, when my name was called, I was completely speechless. And I don't remember what Brad and Trey said up there, and if I was asked to say anything intelligent at that time, I would not have been able to. I was in shock. That is us standing with Eva. Paul Utterback won the scholarship from Crawfordsville, Tony Gonzaro, who's here with us from South, and Sherry Roach from North Putnam. And I got to know these people quite well over our trip and our experience there. We left Terre Haute on a bus, arrived at O'Hare, boarded a plane, flew to Frankfurt, across the top of the world almost, in a very big plane with very small seats. Crammed on a tram, walked on a plane, and arrived in Poland 22 hours later. That was a long trip, but it was very much worth it. We arrived outside of the airport. This is the airport in Krakow. Every street intersection in Krakow or the surrounding areas is a roundabout. That's a KFC, and it says it's open 24 hours. This is the Vistula River, which flows through Krakow. You'll see this again here in a second. This is Wawel Castle. Krakow was very fortunate in the fact that it was not bombed during the war. So all the buildings that are there are in their original state. This is a Holiday Inn that they converted old buildings near Old Town Krakow into a 5-star resort. Example, just some of the buildings in Krakow. This is a Google Earth photo. Old Town Krakow was surrounded by this row of trees, and what we later found out is this is actually the moat from the old city that got filled in, and they made a park, and this park goes all the way around the old city. Our hotel was right here, and it was an easy walk. And this is the town square to beat all town squares. Again, multi-story buildings all the way around. Big clock tower. St. Mary's. It's another view looking east. St. Mary's Cathedral again. My favorite place about this, favorite time to be here was at night. This town square lit up. It was always occupied, always had things going on, even at the middle of the night, and it was just completely gorgeous. Again, cobblestone streets with horse-drawn carriages. And it really was just simply a fantastic place to be. It was definitely a highlight of the trip, looking at that old architecture. This is Wawel Castle, which is at the southern end. Again, you can see these lines of trees. As I go through my Google Earth pictures of this, those lines of trees are going to be markers to give you an idea where we are in Krakow. Big overlook of the Vistula. This is St. Michael's. Very ornate, excellent view. Wawel Castle has the largest collection of tapestries in Eastern Europe because it was not looted as such during World War II. It also wasn't destroyed. It was occupied, but it was not destroyed by the Germans when they evacuated. Krakow was spared the fate of a lot of cities in old Europe because of the respect that they had for that when they evacuated. They didn't destroy it, much like Paris. It was not destroyed. This is Velichka salt mine. 8 of us crammed in a little bitty space, 3 layers on an elevator, and we went down 135 meters below ground. It was very humbling to walk some of these chambers that were dug before Columbus sailed here to find and discover America. Very old chambers from medieval times. St. Kinga's Chapel, I'll show you some pictures of it, all this is carved out of rock salt. And rock salt is one of the reasons why Krakow was able to maintain such an economic stronghold in the area, is because of rock salt. And obviously you know rock salt was needed to preserve food in that era. I'll show you a couple of pictures. There are miles and miles of passageways. It was very easy to get lost if we didn't have our guide with us. Good picture showing the sheen off the walls of rock salt. You couldn't actually see this in person, but the camera did a really good job of picking up what essentially looks like glass. This is looking down. These little steps over the side are the original medieval steps that were carved into it. Everything now is wood. And this is St. Kinga's Chapel. It is carved completely out of rock salt. The chandeliers are made out of rock salt. The paintings or the reliefs in the wall, the statues are all made out of rock salt. The stairways are made out of rock salt. The only thing that's not made out of rock salt down there is the electricity. Everything else in the timbers, everything else is completely made out of and carved out of rock salt. A couple locations, groundwater has seeped in, resulting in several rooms that have ponds in them. It is all pure salt water. Gives you an idea of the amount of lumber that goes into supporting the ceiling in some of these caverns. There is a lot of board feet and timber down there. This is another pond and another room with a secondary stairway for an escape route. Miles upon miles of passageways. More timber. There's one area where they have 2 opposing chambers with a passageway that at one time they actually allowed a boat to go back and forth between the 2. And so you could take a boat ride between sides. Another good picture showing the rock salt and looking straight up into one of the caverns that were carved. I got 2 pictures of these chandeliers. Down below they have a restaurant with a ballroom. They have proms down there, dances, things like that. Again, it's all carved out of rock salt with a wood floor. Moving into Krakow and how the Holocaust has affected the city, Krakow had a very large Jewish population pre-war. And there's actually a section of the old town called the Jewish Quarter where they set up their community. And one of these has a very large synagogue, and around their square is a fence and area that you can see here with a large town square and the synagogue there. There were multiple synagogues spread out across this area. This is the Jewish quarter on the town square. The synagogue. Another view of the grove of trees in the middle, and that's going to come in important here in a second. Close-up of the fence. And if you're familiar with the movie Schindler's List, there's a very important scene where they liquidate the Krakow ghetto. And that was actually filmed in this town square. And if you look close in the movie, you can actually see that fence in the background. And this all took place, this was all filmed in that city street area. There's another scene in that movie where there's a stairway that is not far from there. When they're liquidating the Krakow ghetto in that. Again, these are scenes from Schindler's List. There's that line of trees. This is where the Jewish quarter is at. In March of 1941, they were evicted from the city. And they were forced to go across the river into what was at that time a suburb of Krakow. And then this was liquidated again in 1943, and that's what you see in that movie. But they were actually moved twice, and when they left the second time, they were sent off to labor and death camps. Right across the river is it's now a memorial, it's the empty chair memorial, where they have one chair for every 1,000 people who were taken from Krakow and never returned. And they left from this area here. The original, some of the original buildings are back here. This is the original section of the wall. This was actually designed by the Germans as psychological intimidation, where they made the top of the wall look like traditional Jewish tombstones. The Holocaust is a lot about psychological intimidation, and we'll see some more of that here in a little bit. But basically, once you were behind the tombstones, you were expected to die. Krakow's population of Jewish people went from 65,000 to less than 200 by the end of the war. Most of them were shipped off to labor and death camps. Here's the Old Town, Jewish quarter, Krakow ghetto. This area down here is where a lot of them ended up, and in the movie Schindler's List, this is the labor camp that is seen depicted in that. To this day, it is very much an overgrown pasture, so to speak, with a lot of low scrub brush. They're actually undertaking a movement right now to get this area cleaned up and get it restored a little bit. There is actually a square that, if you look close, is still visible there. That is the original assembly area where they would go out for roll call. It's still visible by the air. It's still a scar there. And there are two areas of previous fortifications that were used for executions that still exist there. I take this because here's that assembly square, and if you look across, this is where Schindler's factory's at. And so it is a walking distance away from Pleshoff labor camp, which is this here. That's the gate from that labor camp that is now in the Schindler factory museum. This was known as the Gray House. The basement was used for all sorts of nefarious purposes. This is a Jewish pre-burial house. Pleshoff labor camp was built on the site of two Jewish cemeteries, and they deconstructed those tombstones in order to make roads, and we'll see that here in a second. But on a whim, as a party gift, the Germans had that blown up, and this is what's left. Again, talking about psychological intimidation. But this is all that's left of the pre-burial house. This is what's left of the cemeteries. Out of those 5,000 stones approximately, there's only one that's still legible. And then they made roads out of it. This is a picture from that site. Again, psychological intimidation. You know, you're going to walk on the memories of your ancestors, so to speak. I was told by our guide that those roads are still there under the ground, and it would be neat to see those brought to light so that history isn't lost forever. Top of the hill, a place of mass executions, and a very stark memorial at the top, I think was very appropriate. This is Schindler's factory, as depicted in the movie. This is his actual desk. It's still there. In the middle of his office is a square made up of pre-enamelware from there. And what was really neat about that is on the inside of that is a tube with all the names of the people that he saved, his list, so to speak, in the center of that enamelware box. We spent 2 days discovering Krakow, and then we spent a further 3 days at Auschwitz I and Auschwitz-Birkenau. Today, Birkenau is still very much a scar on the countryside there, and it's this large area that's over here. Very easily seen, as in these Google Earth images show. And then the original camp is this one here. And so this original camp was used for Soviet POWs and Polish political prisoners. Given the final solution, Auschwitz-Birkenau was selected due to its concentration of Jewish people as one of 6 death camps in Poland. I have taken, and it might be hard to see over there, the bottom half alone of Birkenau and superimposed North Montgomery's property here into, at the same scale, Birkenau. Pleasant Hill would be up here above the screen somewhere. That's Birkenau compared to downtown Crawfordsville. The camp actually extends up here. They had plans to extend and make this camp larger, but the Soviets closed in on them before they were able to get that done. This area up here would have all been part of the second part of the camp. From the top of the gatehouse, this is what you see. As far as you can see, brick ruins and chimneys from the living quarters, living in quotation marks, because it really wasn't much of anything other than just a roof. When we got there, and I think we all had the same idea, Birkenau very much, if you were to take it out of Poland and move it somewhere, looks much like a park that you would see locally. There's trees, paths, meadows, fields, tall grass and wildflowers. Very much a park-like setting. Buildings that wouldn't be out of place with what we would see at Turkey Runner Shades. Auschwitz I could double very much as a college campus. Maintained streets, brick buildings, decorative trees, large kitchen. Except the machine gun pits. and the barbed wire and the insulators and the gates and the gas chambers and the gallows and the searchlights and the mass graves, the ovens, and all those neat park-like features that you one time saw. Every one of them has a black marble monument marking it as a place where human ashes were scattered. And they were everywhere. Barbed wire everywhere. And those fields were used when the gas chambers produced too many people that they had to burn them in open pits out in the yard because they couldn't get enough people cremated in the ovens. The one-way train track. Our guide said that 80% of people who got off this train here went straight to the gas chambers and were never accounted for. This is a book that I picked up there, The Place Where You're Standing. Again, showing the selection process. Very interesting book. It's the biggest book I've ever seen. It's a book with 4 million names. These are only Jewish, and there's 2 million names missing from that book. It's 24 approximately feet long, but I pasted off. And all of them have, every page is filled with a name and a place, a town, and a lot of them were forever wiped off the face of the earth because of the Holocaust. Piles of glasses. Every person that owned those became a victim. Enamel wear, kids' clothes, 40,000 pairs of shoes. And you get lost a little bit in the size of Birkenau. And you notice a key or a button or a glass bead. And a lot of times for me when I was there, the small things made me ask the most questions. Who owned you? What were you part of? Where did you come from? Forever lost. All that information is gone. And you walk around there and you get mad and you get very angry as you're walking around those camps. Very much a different trip with Eva. Every photo, she smiles. And that is what makes this trip fantastic. She lost her whole family to Birkenau. And she comes back smiling. And it's real easy to see, as we'll talk about here in a second, why that is. But she is able to walk around a camp that caused her so much pain and took her family away and took away pretty much everything about her, and she is able to walk around there because that place has no more power and control over her. And that's what makes a trip with Eva Cord different than going there alone. It's easy to get mad while you're there. Eva does a really good job of funneling that energy into something very positive, and that's what I'm glad to have brought back. We ended up leaving Krakow crammed on a plane. And made our trip back to the States. But with us, all that went, Eva's message definitely resonates with all of us. And the fact that she was able to move past the hate. And she was able to move past the past, and she was able to shed that anchor that she would drag with her regarding the Holocaust, and move on to something much more powerful than that, and that is forgiveness. And she walks around that place, and she smiles, and she walks around Birkenau as if she owns the place. Because she really does. Birkenau has no power and control over her. She definitely won. Quick Flight Black. 8 days, 10,000 miles, 2,300 photos, and several new friends later, I'm able to bring this message back to our youth here in our hallways. And as your school resource officer, here's a couple of things that I know that I'm able to apply the message and what I learned this summer in Birkenau. Definitely Eva's story. It's a powerful one. I don't know if I've met a more remarkable human being in my life. And you're going to get a chance to share that and see how it transformed her. She doesn't carry that anchor around with her, dragging her and linking her to the past. And she's moved on. Our kids are losing resilience. They're losing that grit that it takes to move forward. And they're losing their hope. We've got to get our hope back. Eva's a big part of that. Got to get that hope back in our kids. Interpersonal and social conflict is a lot of times a power struggle. Learned a lot about that when I was here in Birkenau, on how we're able to develop our youth into being able to take that interpersonal conflict and come out the winner in that. And most importantly, using your power for good. Because we know, at least I learned, especially in this trip, that behind every great person is a great person. And I put the second great in quotations because they don't have to be an Einstein. They don't have to be a billionaire. They have to be someone that's in our youth's corner all the time. They have to be that person. They have to be that support system. And that's what makes them great. I should probably change this, that behind every successful person is a great person, because we want to see our kids succeed as they go forward into their adult years. Hate still exists. We get off the plane in O'Hare, and it's hard to see. That is actually a swastika on the side of our vehicle. As my parents were picking me up, someone walked by and put a swastika on our car. I find this one more appropriate. And this is some graffiti from Krakow. Tony's going to give his presentation on October 3rd at Southmont. If you would like to hear, he has a very interesting side of his observation, because his father was actually in Auschwitz and several other camps as well. And Tony was able to trace back while we were in Krakow and learn a lot about his family history. And so that's going to be an exciting presentation on October 3rd at Southmont. This is one I challenge you all to see, though. Eva's documentary is going to come out October 25th, 2018 at 8 p.m. on WFYI. It was produced in conjunction with Ted Green, and it's good. It's good. And you'll be able to see her transformation on when she was able to get rid of the hate, and she was able to cast that anchor away and move forward with her life through forgiveness. The most important thing I think I could tell our students on this is that you're not forgiving for the other person. You're forgiving for yourself. Because it doesn't matter how much you hate the other person, it's not going to hurt them. You forgive for yourself. Very fortunate to have been able to be part of this opportunity to travel to Poland and learn this. When I've been dealing with youth over the years, I had bits and pieces of it right. This trip has given me the ability to finish out that argument with good evidence and a great story. So again, I would like to thank Hoosier Heartland State Bank. I would like to thank Tony for putting up with me, and Sherry and Paul for putting up with me on the trip. And hopefully we'll see everybody at Tony's talk on the 3rd. Contact information, you have any questions, get a hold of me. I'll be around at the end if you have questions. So thank you.